I'm not here to bash anyone's religion. I'm not here to speak ill of it, to say what the correct religion is, because that's, the whole thing was this is without religion. Just spirituality without religion, of course. But I am going to talk about God. I don't mean any specific God. I don't mean Jehovah, or Allah, or Shiva, or Zeus, or Odin, or any God in particular, except the one that you can't really name. You can't really put in a box or a story. I'm going to try. It doesn't really need a name. Religion, your spirituality, it doesn't need any specific practices, services, or rituals. It doesn't even need to adhere to a specific tradition to be part of, or be part of any outlined spiritual path. All that really matters is that we strive for truth, and we strive for personal understanding. All that matters is our relationship to self and our relationship to what we refer to at this point in the lecture as the divine. The light of God, say God, shines down and is reflected and received as many diverse colors by many diverse eyes. It is when we strive to see all the colors in the spectrum that we begin to see its source more clearly. When we look for the parallels, find the truth in between all of these other ideas. Whether we start at one end or the other, the light is apparent everywhere we look, so long as we have eyes for it and an open heart. We see this light whatever form it takes to show us the way. It is said that there are two ways to pursue this light. The first, through worship, which sees God as separate from us, all-powerful, and the second, which sees ourselves as pieces of the whole, and therefore able to achieve the consciousness of God. The first perspective can lead to either a path of love and worship, or to a path of hate and intolerance towards other perspectives on how we live, or even what to call God. Our ego reflecting on something that's supposed to not really have an ego, we've given it an ego. The ego being sense of self, not Freudian ego, just mind, identity. The second perspective has its ups and downs too. So it can lead to either a feeling of knowing, a deep feeling of interconnection between all things, or to a state of arrogantly thinking you're better or wiser than others who are not quite as enlightened as you are, or as you think you are, or some of the people have told you you are, or what Oprah's book club says you are. I'm going to be honest, I'll humble myself today by confessing that I have been both negative ends of that spectrum. But I've learned that by suffering through and knowing these negative states, that one may come to a middle ground where the two spiritual perspectives become evident that they are equally valid, and they coexist within the same truth, as we ourselves are reflections of the divine in all its manifestations. We'll get back into that a little bit more later, though. It's a funny thing about opposites. This being a rather funny universe where opposites coexist in every aspect of reality, as the quantum physicist and somewhat occult philosopher, occult meaning that which is hidden, not meaning, prick your finger and step into a circle. Just that which is hidden, the spirituality that people are afraid to express. He said, well, the opposite of truth may be the truth. The opposite Well, the opposite of truth. Well, the opposite of truth may be a lie. The opposite of the truth may also be another truth. He stressed the paradox. He said, so we've reached paradox. Now we can finally get something going here. We have all these different dualities, all of these different opposite polarities. We have night and day, we have alive and dead. We have good and evil, love and hate, happy and sad, manic and depressed, sick and healthy, rich and poor, up and down, left and right, inside and outside, true and false, east and west, north and south, pain and pleasure, joy and sorrow, foreground and background, knowing and not knowing. Everything is divided. And as a result, so are we. So is our perception. And yet it is a point of reference. We don't know one thing without something else to compare it to. So it makes you wonder, is this whole duality thing, is it there to screw with us, or is it there to give us perspective? Alan Watts, the 20th century Zen Buddhist philosopher, demonstrated in an old video lecture from his youth that the only reason you can see anything is because its borders are clearly defined by everything outside of and especially behind it from a visual perspective. He showed this by putting his arm up in front of a white screen and the light turned up so that his hand, his arm was completely backlit, and the edge of his arm wasn't. It's hard to make out. So with nothingness, we can't have an idea of somethingness. We can't have an idea of one thing without something else. That's how the conscious mind works. That's how perception works. We need some place to have it. But more importantly, we would not know how to feel about anything without duality. Without a point of reference to compare something, an idea, an experience, a sensation, an emotion, the actions of another person, or our idea of self, without the duality. We need some place for our memories and opinions to be anchored. The problem is that it's like trying to drop anchor in the middle of a hurricane out at sea. We get so caught up trying to place value, place past judgment, simply make a decision about life, that we often end up with no time to really live. The trick is to build your perspective around the reconciliation of the dualities, especially when it comes to yourself, because perception starts with the self. You're never really going to have a chance to get anywhere with this with yourself if you don't do this, if you don't allow yourself a state of mind to do it. At least not anywhere I'd recommend going. Though at the same time, I wholeheartedly endorse exploration of all dualities, which you can't reconcile them to understand. How do we know what's up until we know what's down? How will we know what works for us until we know what doesn't? Back to our emotions, though. There's a surefire way to reconcile our conflicting emotions. And it's through this same process, diving deep into really understanding. This takes deep introspection. But for deep introspection, we need a certain degree of detachment from our idea of self, mainly in our tendency to judge ourselves. We have to bring ourselves to a psychedelic state, per se. By this, I don't mean taking hallucinogens. That's just, it's funny how language works, you know. An idea gets attached to a word, and the definition in the mass mind gets changed. But I mean the original definition. Putting your mind in front of you. Turning it around, looking at it, analyzing it. Viewing the mind from an outside perspective. doing it subjectively. This practice is integral to a process that is known by many names here in the West. Well, not here in the West so much as in the West when Europe was as far west as you could go. In our, what has now become our culture over here. It's alchemy. In Buddhism, it's Vajrayana. There's other terms for it. Learning to see. Native American, I'll just call it sit. Just go sit. Go. How do you go down the path? You sit. You think. It's contemplation, recapitulation. All these other terms. Well, what they have in common is that they lead you to a deeper understanding of the self and how you're linked to everything in the world. In the Divine Comedy, Dante's Inferno, he approaches a mountain, which only has one path leading over its peak. This path is blocked by a wildcat, which looked at him like a tasty steak. Lucky him, the spirit of the virtual philosopher appeared and said, I got a way around this, well, under it. And it's very fitting that the sign, the entrance to this cavern, underneath the mountain, said, abandon all hope, you who enter here, for it was hell. But what's hell? It's our state of mind. So, the Native American philosopher, Little Bear, would say, well, you made this decision, you've decided to go down the path, you can't turn back now. Nothing will be the same. You can't stop halfway through. In regards to sitting. So, goes through this gateway, traverses the 9 levels of hell. Each one occupied by those who had sinned in increasingly horrible ways against their fellow man and God. So, sin, interesting. The Buddhist word sin, the idea of sin comes from even the word itself and how it's somehow melded in in emerging from the Far East and the Middle East and then Christianity coming over. So it comes from the term that means to miss the target. It's an archery term. It means you're not living life well, you're missing the target. So, upon seeing and understanding the horrors that humanity is capable of, Dante gained the perspective necessary to be shown heaven. He could not have appreciated this state, this place, I want to call it state, until he had seen all of these horrors. What does this teach us? It teaches us that to appreciate good, we must have an idea of evil. We must understand suffering to understand joy. We must look at the darkest parts of ourselves to appreciate the light that also resides within us. This is very similar to actually the underworld journey of an initiate shaman, the journey of meditation of the initiate shaman. As they go down to learn to understand the dark and to heal. Both themselves initially and always the self further on, of course, because you keep living. And mainly to heal others. In a dualistic reality such as ours, one needs this one reference. You need that grab. Separation before conjunction. So, allow your heart to be torn asunder by its own darkness, so that its light may rebuild your heart and transform it into that which